The laughter in the room was a physical thing, a glittering, sharp-edged cloud that hung under the crystal chandeliers of the Caraway estate. It was the kind of laughter that wasn't about humor, but about power. It was about reinforcing who was in and who was out. And I, Ariana Faye Caraway, was most definitely out. Expensive champagne fizzed in 1,000 flutes, gowns shimmered like liquid jewels, and the clinking of glasses was a constant, melodic reminder of the wealth that surrounded me, a world I had married into but would never truly belong to. My husband, Brexon Caraway, sat beside me, a perfect portrait of inherited arrogance. He held his glass aloft, not to toast, but to command the attention of the long mahogany table. A smirk played on his lips, the same one he used when he was about to land a punchline he was particularly proud of. "She says she's busy," he scoffed, his voice carrying easily across the polished silverware and elaborate floral centerpieces. The table, a collection of his sycophantic family and business associates, erupted in precisely the way he'd intended. A wave of derisive chuckles. "Busy doing what, darling?" his sister Lucinda chimed in, her voice like splintered glass. She was beautiful, venomous, and had never worked a day in her life. She leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light, perfecting her YouTube tutorials in the basement. Another ripple of laughter, this one louder, more confident. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a hot, shameful blush that I prayed the dim, flattering light would hide. I stared down at my untouched plate of roasted quail. My hand, wrapped around the delicate stem of my champagne flute, was trembling. I gripped it tighter, imagining the glass shattering, the shards a physical manifestation of the anger coiling in my gut. But I said nothing. I had learned early on that silence was my only shield in this family. Any defense would only be twisted into another joke, another reason to mock the simple, quiet woman Brexon had inexplicably chosen to be his wife. The real reason, of course, was image. I was pliable, from a respectable but unremarkable family, pretty enough to be an accessory, but not threatening enough to have ambitions of my own. I was the perfect blank canvas onto which he could project the image of a settled, traditional man. "Maybe she's finally opening that lemonade stand she's been dreaming of," someone else piped up from down the table. I didn't look to see who. It didn't matter. They were all the same. A chorus of condescension. Brexon patted my hand, a gesture that looked supportive to the uninformed observer but felt like a leash. Now, be nice," he said, his voice oozing false chivalry. "My wife has hobbies, it keeps her occupied." Occupied. As if I were a child who needed a toy to keep from wandering into traffic. The word echoed in my mind, each syllable a fresh sting. I had an English degree from a good university, a mind that was sharp and curious, but in their world, if it didn't generate millions or appear in a society column, it was a hobby. Useless. That's when the waiter, silent and efficient in his starched white jacket, rolled in the large gold-plated television screen. It was a Caraway Christmas tradition, a garish display of their priorities. Live business headlines. Brexon's father, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes, would always announce with performative gravity, "To toast the market, the engine of our prosperity." The family quieted, their attention shifting to the screen as the familiar graphics of a major business news network filled the frame. They leaned in, their expressions turning serious, their minds already calculating wins and losses. I usually took this as my cue to fade even further into the background, to become a part of the damask wallpaper. But then, the screen changed. It cut from a shot of the stock exchange floor to a press conference. The backdrop was the state capitol building, and standing at the podium, flanked by dignitaries, was a woman in a crisp navy blazer, her hair pulled back into a severe professional bun. And it was me. A collective, sharp intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the room. The chattering stopped, the clinking of glasses ceased. There was only the sound of the news anchor's voice, clear and authoritative, filling the sudden cavernous silence. I watched, my own face reflected back at me. But it was a version of me they had never seen. Confident, composed, powerful. I was shaking hands with Governor Elridge, a firm, decisive motion, a wide smile, genuine and triumphant, was on my face. The chyron at the bottom of the screen was stark and unambiguous. Ariana Faye, CEO of Axova Real Estate Group, wins bid to lead the Southport Innovation District. The anchor's voice continued, a death knell to the life I had been living. In a stunning upset, the relatively unknown Axova Group, headed by CEO Oriana Faye, has secured the massive $82 million government contract to develop the coveted Southport Innovation District, a project that Caraway Consolidated has publicly vied for over the past year. Lucinda let out a strangled gasp, her perfectly painted mouth hanging open. I saw the flash of the camera from the end of the table. Rhea Dolmer, the investigative journalist Lucinda had brought as her date, was a consummate professional. She was already documenting the story. To my right, there was a loud clatter. Brexon's silver fork had slipped from his numb fingers, hitting his plate with a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the frozen room. His father, the patriarch, the man who moved markets, had gone pale. The ruddy, confident complexion was gone, replaced by a pasty, sickly white. He looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my own champagne flute on the table. The trembling had stopped. I rose from my chair, my movements fluid and unhurried. I smoothed down the front of my simple black dress, a dress they had probably assumed was my only nice one. I let my eyes drift over each of their stunned, disbelieving faces. Brexon, Lucinda, their father, all of them, frozen in a tableau of shock. And then, I smiled. Not the timid, apologetic smile they were used to. This one was different. It was sharp. It was victorious. It was the smile of a woman they had never known, and it was the last thing they would ever see of the old me. The first Christmas after the wedding was a masterclass in humiliation. I had married into the Caraway dynasty in a summer ceremony that was less a celebration of love and more a merger of assets and appearances. I was the asset. Brexon was the appearance. By the time the holidays rolled around, the festive veneer of our new life together had already worn thin, revealing the cold, hard structure beneath. The Caraway estate was draped in opulence, every surface groaning under the weight of garlands, bespoke ornaments, and the suffocating scent of pine and cinnamon. It was beautiful, but it felt like a museum, a place where you looked but didn't touch. I drifted through the grand rooms like a ghost, an accessory Brexon was required to have on his arm but not in his conversations. Important discussions happened in hushed tones in the study, a room with leather-bound books that were never read, and a fireplace that was always roaring. I was not invited. The men Brexon, his father, his uncles would retreat there after dinner, brandy snifters in hand to talk about acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and the shifting tides of their vast fortune. The women, led by my sister-in-law Lucinda and her mother, would congregate in the drawing room, their conversations a dizzying carousel of gossip, social calendars, and thinly veiled critiques of anyone not present. I tried, in the beginning. I really did. At one dinner, Brexon's father was lamenting a zoning issue with a commercial property downtown. I had just finished reading a fascinating article about urban renewal projects and the creative use of mixed-use zoning permits. "You know," I began, my voice softer than I intended, "I was reading that in some cities, they're offering tax incentives for developers who include public green spaces. It might be a way to get the city council on your side." I trailed off. The entire table had gone silent. Lucinda let out a short, sharp laugh, like a bark. "Oh, that's adorable," she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. She thinks it's like a city planning game on her little computer. Brexon, instead of defending me, or even just changing the subject, simply smiled and shook his head, a gesture that said, "See what I have to put up with." He reached over and patted my arm. "Stick to your decorating magazines, sweetheart. This is a bit more complicated." The table relaxed, the moment of my absurd interruption having passed. The conversation moved on, leaving me sitting in a pool of hot silence. It was then I realized that my thoughts, my ideas, my entire education, were not just unwelcome, they were an annoyance. My useless English degree, as Lucinda once called it at a brunch, was a family punchline. They saw it as proof of my lack of practical, money-making sense. The true nadir of that first Christmas season came a week before the holiday itself. Lucinda was in the throes of planning her own ostentatious wedding, and the family's world revolved around it. She was holding a bridal tasting for her cake, an event that apparently required the attendance of every female caraway. "Oriana, you'll be there, of course," Lucinda said. Not as a question, but as a command. We were in the sunroom, the winter light doing nothing to warm the chilly atmosphere. I swallowed, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Lucinda, I can't. I have a commitment that afternoon." The commitment was the final exam for an online certificate course in project management I'd been secretly taking. It felt small and silly compared to her grand event, but it was mine. It was a tiny flicker of something I was doing for myself. Lucinda raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. A commitment. What could possibly be more important than tasting my wedding cake? Before I could formulate a vague but plausible excuse, Brexon, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up and laughed. He didn't just chuckle, he threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that filled the room. "A commitment," he roared, showing his phone to his mother. "She told me she was too busy this week." Too busy. I went down to the basement to look for my old golf clubs, and you know what she was doing? Watching some video about how to organize a closet. It wasn't true. I had been watching a lecture on supply chain management, but the lie was easier, more fitting for the narrative they'd built for me. The useless wife with her silly little hobbies. "Too busy," Lucinda repeated, savoring the words like a piece of expensive chocolate. "Is that what you call your failed Etsy shop now? A commitment?" My Etsy shop. I had tried, before the wedding, to sell my handcrafted calligraphy prints. I'd made a few $100s. It was a point of pride for me then. Now, it was a cudgel they used to beat me with. A symbol of my small, pathetic ambitions. I just sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, feeling the eyes of his mother, his sister, and my husband on me. They weren't just teasing, they were defining me, boxing me in, ensuring I knew my place. I was the court jester in their kingdom, and I wasn't even allowed to wear a funny hat. I was just supposed to sit there and be the joke. That night, as I lay in the cavernous, cold bedroom next to a husband who was a stranger to me, I stared at the ceiling and felt a kind of despair so profound it was almost peaceful. The fight had gone out of me. They had won. I was who they said I was, a nobody, a ghost haunting the halls of a life that wasn't my own, a woman with no commitments more important than the whims of the family who owned her. The laughter from that afternoon echoed in my ears, a cold, heartless Christmas carol, heralding a future that looked bleak and empty. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I fled the sunroom, the sound of their laughter chasing me down the hall. I didn't stop until I reached the basement, stumbling down the cold concrete steps and into the damp, musty air. The heavy door swung shut behind me, plunging me into near darkness and a silence that was a balm on my raw nerves. I leaned against the door, my body shaking with silent sobs, tears streaming down my face and dripping onto the dusty floor. This basement was the Caraway family's forgotten space, a tomb for things they no longer valued. Piles of old furniture draped in white sheets stood like silent ghosts. Boxes of discarded decorations and forgotten childhood toys were stacked against the stone walls. It smelled of earth and decay and regret. It was the perfect reflection of how I felt. Discarded, forgotten, buried alive in a life of gilded misery. I sank to the floor, my back against a stack of old magazines, and let myself cry. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one with passions and a quiet confidence. I cried for the fool I had become, so blinded by the dazzling promise of the Caraway name that I hadn't seen the prison it was. Most of all, I cried because Brexon's mockery had contained a sliver of truth. I was wasting my life. I was letting them shrink me down to nothing. My sobs eventually subsided into ragged, hiccuping breaths. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, feeling a surge of something other than despair. It was anger, a cold, hard knot of fury forming in the pit of my stomach. How dare they? How dare he? My gaze drifted around the dim space, landing on an old desk shoved into a corner, piled high with junk. On top of a stack of yellowed newspapers was a laptop, an old one, thick and heavy, Brexton's, from his college days, probably. I pushed myself up, my legs stiff, and walked over to it. On a whim, I opened it. A spider scurried out from under the keyboard. I brushed it away and pressed the power button, not expecting anything. To my surprise, it whirred to life, the screen glowing with a faint blue light. The Wi-Fi from the house above was weak, but it was there. I opened a web browser, the page loading with agonizing slowness. I didn't know what I was looking for. A distraction, maybe. A window into a world beyond these suffocating walls. My fingers typed online courses into the search bar. The results were a random assortment of skills: coding, graphic design, creative writing. Then, on the side of the screen, a recommended video popped up. It was a YouTube ad, one I would normally skip. The thumbnail showed a smiling man in a hard hat standing in front of a half-finished building. The title was simple: Real Estate Investing 101, How I Turned $1,000 into a Fortune. It was exactly the kind of thing Brexton and his family would ridicule, a get-rich-quick scheme for desperate people. The kind of YouTube tutorial they imagined me watching. And in a fit of defiance, I clicked it. The man, his name was Elias Vane, wasn't slick or salesy. He was older, with a kind, weathered face and a no-nonsense way of speaking. He wasn't selling a dream, he was explaining a system. He talked about zoning laws, property liens, market analysis, and something called forced appreciation. He used simple language, breaking down complex ideas into manageable steps. He spoke of land as something more than just dirt, but as a system of value that could be understood and leveraged. I was mesmerized. I clicked on another one of his videos, and then another. An hour passed, then two. I had pulled up a dusty old chair and was hunched over the glowing screen, completely absorbed. For the first time in over a year, my mind felt alive, engaged, firing on all cylinders. This wasn't a hobby, this was a discipline. It was math and law, and psychology, and negotiation all rolled into one. It was a language of power, the very language the Caraways spoke, but I had never been given the dictionary. At the end of his introductory series, he mentioned a beginner's course he offered. It cost a few $100s. I had a small savings account, money from before my marriage that the Caraways didn't know about. It was my escape fund, though I'd never truly had a plan for where to escape to. My hand hovered over the mouse, the Enroll Now button pulsing softly on the screen. Fear whispered in my ear, "This is ridiculous. You're not a business person. Lucinda was right. You'll fail, they'll find out, and laugh even harder." But the anger was stronger. The image of Brexton's laughing face, of Lucinda's sneer, flashed in my mind. The feeling of being small, of being nothing. I would rather fail on my own terms than wither away in silence on theirs. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air still smelled like dust and damp stone, but now it felt different. It felt like the ground floor of something new. This basement wasn't a tomb, it was a foundation. I clicked the button. A confirmation page appeared. I had done it. A tiny, secret act of rebellion. I looked around the dark, forgotten space, at the ghosts of the Caraway family's past, and right there, surrounded by their discarded memories, I made a promise to myself. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, cold vow that settled deep in my bones. 1 year. I would give myself 1 year. I would learn this world inside and out. I would work in secret, in the shadows of this very house, using their mockery as my fuel. I would not say a word. I would not give them a single hint. And 1 year from now, I would not be the woman sobbing in the basement. I would be someone they never saw coming. I would prove them all wrong. The next few months were a blur of bifurcated existence. By day, I was Ariana Caraway, the docile wife, attending luncheons, nodding politely at charity events, and managing the household with a serene smile. But by night, and in every stolen moment in between, I was a student. The basement became my sanctuary, my university. I devoured Elias Vane's course, then moved on to others. My old laptop a portal to a world of deeds, titles, and escrow. I learned about wholesaling, about flipping, about commercial leases and residential zoning. My useless English degree turned out to be an asset. I could read and comprehend dense legal documents and craft compelling emails. My first practical assignment was to get out and understand the local market. Not the high-end, glossy market the Caraways operated in, but the forgotten corners of the city, the overlooked lots, the rundown commercial strips, the transitional neighborhoods. So I started taking long walks, my phone in hand, cross-referencing public property records with the physical reality of the addresses. It was on one of these walks that I met him. I was in a small, slightly neglected public park bordering an old industrial zone. It was a part of the city most people drove past without a second glance. I was studying a series of small, oddly shaped parcels of land on my tablet, trying to understand why they'd been left undeveloped for so long. "They're a zoning nightmare," a voice said, startling me. "That's why they're still here." I looked up from my screen to see an older man sitting on the other end of my bench. He had a kind, weathered face that seemed incredibly familiar, and a bag of birdseed he was scattering for a flock of greedy pigeons. He wore a simple tweed jacket and a flat cap, looking more like a retired professor than a real estate expert. It was Elias Vane, the man from the YouTube videos. I felt a jolt of shock, my heart thudding in my chest. I'm sorry?" I stammered, feeling like a student caught cheating. He smiled, a gentle, knowing expression. "The parcels you're looking at, they're caught between 3 different zoning designations: light industrial, historical preservation, and a bizarre residential overlay from the 70s. The city council can't agree on what to do with them, so they just sit there, a bureaucratic no man's land." I stared at him, my mouth slightly agape. "How did you know what I was looking at?" He gestured with his chin toward my tablet. "I recognized the plat map. I tried to buy that cluster of land 15 years ago, gave up after 6 months of headaches." He paused, his gaze sharp and intelligent. "The real question is, what is a woman who looks like she belongs at the country club doing studying plat maps in this part of town?" His directness caught me off guard. There was no judgment in his tone, only genuine curiosity. I found myself being honest. "I'm learning," I said simply. "I took your online course." A flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by a warm laugh. "Well, I'll be one of my digital disciples. It's a pleasure to meet you in the real world." He extended a hand. "Elias Vane." "Oriana Faye," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his hands calloused from a life of work. I deliberately left off the caraway. In this new world I was building, that name was a liability. He quizzed me then, casually, as he continued to feed the pigeons. He asked me about cap rates, about easements, about the difference between a quitclaim deed and a warranty deed. He asked me what I thought the city's next growth corridor would be. I answered his questions as best I could, my initial nervousness giving way to the excitement of a genuine, intellectual conversation. It was a discussion between peers, something I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't just recite facts, I offered my own analysis, theories I'd been developing during my late-night study sessions. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, his shrewd eyes never leaving my face. When I had finished, he was silent for a long moment, tossing the last of the seeds to the birds. "You've got the knack," he said finally, his voice serious. "You don't just see the lots, you see the system behind them. That's rare. Most people just see buildings or dirt." He stood up, brushing the dust from his trousers. I thought he was about to leave, and a pang of disappointment hit me. "I'm mostly retired," he said, looking out over the scraggly park. "My daughter, she was supposed to take over my business. She had the same knack you do, sharp as a tack." He sighed, a deep, sad sound. "But she didn't have the stomach for the fight. She let people push her around, tell her she wasn't good enough. She believed them. I failed her. I pushed too hard, and she ran in the opposite direction." He turned back to me, his expression intense. You remind me of her, the sharp mind. But I see something else in your eyes. I see a fire she didn't have. You're not just doing this for the money, are you? No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm doing it to prove something. He nodded, as if that was the answer he was expecting. Good, that's a powerful fuel. Look, I don't do this anymore. My consulting days are long over, but I see potential, and I hate to see it wasted. He pulled a simple business card from his wallet. If you're serious about this, I mean truly serious, not just playing around, I'll mentor you, I'll teach you the things you can't learn from a video, but it's not free. My heart leaped. What do you want? 10%, he said flatly. 10% equity in whatever company you build. I won't take a dime until you're making real money. If you fail, I get nothing. If you succeed, I get my cut. That way, I'm invested in you winning. He held out the card. It's your call, Oriana Faye. Are you serious, or are you just a tourist? I looked from his steady gaze to the simple card in his hand. It was the most important decision of my life. A partnership. A mentor. A real path forward. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I took the card. I'm serious, I said, my voice firm, all traces of doubt gone. Elias's mentorship was a baptism by fire. There were no gentle introductions or easy first steps. He believed in learning by doing, and more importantly, learning by failing. The market is a cruel teacher, he told me during one of our first meetings in a greasy spoon diner. Better you learn your lessons on a small scale with me than on a big one with sharks. My life became a frantic, exhausting juggle. I was still the perfect caraway wife, attending mind-numbing social events where I'd smile and nod while my mind was racing through title searches and zoning codes. I'd excuse myself to the powder room, not to fix my makeup, but to pull out my phone and respond to an urgent email from a property agent under my new anonymous email address. Then I would go home, wait for Brexon's heavy breathing to deepen into sleep, and creep down to my basement office. The nights were a frantic race against the dawn, fueled by cheap coffee and a desperate hunger to learn. The laptop screen was my world, filled with spreadsheets, legal documents, and a constant stream of cold calls and emails. I was trying to wholesale my first property, finding a distressed seller, getting the property under contract, and then selling that contract to an investor for a small fee. It was supposed to be the safest, lowest risk entry point into the business. Elias had me focusing on a portfolio of out-of-state tax liens, properties seized for unpaid taxes. I found what I thought was the perfect deal. A small vacant lot in a neighboring state. The back taxes were just under $12,000. The online records showed it was in a developing area, and I had an investor, a contact from one of Elias's old lists, who was interested. He was a smooth talker named Marcus, and he made it all sound so easy. You get the lien, I pay you $15,000 for the contract. Easy $3,000 for you, kid. I was so excited, so eager for my first win, that I ignored the warning bells. I ignored Elias's primary rule: never ever skip the due diligence, no matter how good it looks. I didn't hire a local title company to do a full search. I didn't send a photographer to get recent pictures of the lot. I relied on the outdated, grainy images from the county website. I drained my secret savings account, all $12,000 of it, and wired the money to the county to satisfy the lien and take control of the property. The moment the transfer was confirmed, I called Marcus, my heart pounding with triumph. It's done, I said, unable to keep the pride from my voice. The lien is mine. I'm ready to assign the contract. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, a dry chuckle. Oh, kid, you didn't actually look at the property, did you? A cold dread washed over me. What are you talking about? I sent my guy out there this morning just to be sure, he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. That developing area, it's a floodplain. The city just redesignated it last month after the big storm. That lot is worthless. It's literally underwater. You didn't buy a lot, you bought a pond. The phone felt slick in my hand. I couldn't speak. Sorry, kid, he said, and the line went dead. I sat there in the cold basement, staring at my laptop screen. My bank account balance, $47. My secret escape fund, the money I had so carefully guarded for years, was gone, wiped out in a single stupid amateur mistake. I had been scammed, not by Marcus, but by my own hubris. The tears came then, hot and furious. I wasn't just crying about the money, I was crying from the sheer crushing weight of my failure. The voices of Brexon and Lucinda echoed in my head. Useless. Not a professional. Stick to your hobbies. They were right. I was a fraud. I was playing a game I didn't understand, and I had just been wiped off the board. I wanted to quit. The thought was a seductive comfort. I could just delete the files, throw the old laptop in the trash, and go back to being the numb, smiling wife. It would be easier. I called Elias the next morning, my voice thick with shame, and told him everything. I expected him to be angry, to tell me he'd made a mistake in mentoring me. Instead, he was quiet. When I finished, he said, "Good." "Good?" I asked, bewildered. "I lost everything, Elias. Every penny." "You lost $12,000, he corrected me, his voice firm, "but you bought a lesson worth $1 million. You will never, ever skip your due diligence again for the rest of your life. You'll check and double-check and triple-check every detail until you're blue in the face. Some people pay hundreds of thousands to learn that lesson. You got it for a bargain. Now are you going to cry about it, or are you going to get back to work?" His tough, unsentimental response was the slap in the face I needed. He wasn't disappointed in me. He was treating this as a cost of doing business, a part of my education. The shame began to recede, replaced by a grim determination. I didn't have money anymore, but I had the lesson. I went back to the drawing board. I couldn't afford to buy anything, so I started focusing on finding deals for others. I drove through industrial parks, writing down the numbers on for-lease signs. I cold-called small business owners, asking if they were looking to expand or relocate. I was relentless. I made hundreds of calls, faced dozens of rejections. And then, I got a hit. A small manufacturing company was looking for a new warehouse. I spent a week digging through listings, cross-referencing their needs with available properties. I found a perfect match, an off-market property Elias had mentioned in passing. I connected the business owner with the property owner. 2 weeks later, they signed a lease. The property owner sent me a finder's fee, $5,000. It wasn't a fortune, but as I looked at the check, it felt bigger than any $12,000 I had ever lost. It was real. It was earned. It was proof that I could get up after being knocked down. I hadn't just survived my first trial by fire. I had come out stronger, smarter, and with a few scars to remind me of the price of admission. The $5,000 check was my seed money. It was tangible proof that Elias was right. Failure was just tuition. I didn't deposit it into my personal account. Instead, I took the first concrete step toward building something real. I used half of it to pay the legal fees to form a limited liability company, a shield to protect myself, and a vessel for my future ambitions. I needed a name, something that sounded solid and professional, something that had no connection to the name Caraway. I settled on Exova Group. It sounded vaguely corporate, strong, and best of all, it was completely anonymous. It was mine. With the remaining money, I doubled down. Elias guided me toward a different strategy, flipping small, undesirable land lots. These were the forgotten scraps of the city, triangular lots wedged between highways, narrow strips behind commercial buildings, land with minor title issues that scared off bigger developers. They were cheap, and they were a headache, which meant there was an opportunity. My first real target was a gritty quarter-acre plot near the industrial zone, choked with weeds and littered with debris. It was unattractive, but my research showed the city was planning to expand a nearby access road within the next 2 years, which would suddenly give it valuable commercial frontage. It was a gamble on future growth. I spent weeks negotiating with the out-of-state owner who had inherited it and just wanted to get rid of the tax burden. Using the negotiation tactics Elias had drilled into me, I got it under contract for a price that was almost criminally low. The next 60 days were a masterclass in hustle. I hired a local crew to clear the lot, a line item that made me sweat. I spent hours at the county clerk's office, untangling a minor lien from a defunct landscaping company. I worked with a surveyor to get the property lines clearly marked. Every dollar was accounted for in a meticulous spreadsheet. Then, I created a simple but professional marketing package, highlighting the future road expansion and the potential for a small warehouse or a fleet parking lot. I sent it out to a targeted list of local business owners and investors. The day I sold it was a rainy Tuesday. The buyer was the owner of a local plumbing company who needed space for his vans. When the wire transfer hit my new Axova Group business account, I just stared at the number on my screen. After all my expenses, my profit was $22,000. $22,000. It was more money than I had ever earned on my own in my entire life. It wasn't inherited. It wasn't an allowance from my husband. It was the direct result of my own research, my own negotiation, my own work. I sat there in my basement office, the damp air smelling of success, and felt a profound sense of pride that was so intense it almost brought me to tears. That evening, I was so buoyed by my victory that I made a mistake. I grew careless. I had been working on a business plan for Axova Group, a 5-year strategy to scale from flipping small lots to acquiring multifamily properties. I'd printed out a draft to review, and in my haste to get ready for one of Lucinda's mandatory family dinners, I left it on the printer in the upstairs study. We were at the Caraway mansion that night, the usual assembly of smug faces and empty pleasantries. I was quiet as usual, but inside I was buzzing. I had a secret, a glorious $22,000 secret. After dinner, Brexon motioned for me to join him in the study. My heart sank. His expression was one I knew well, a mixture of amusement and contempt. He was holding a stack of papers, my business plan. "I found this on the printer," he said, his voice loud enough for Lucinda and her fiancé, who were lounging on the nearby sofa to hear. "Axova Group," he read from the cover page, drawing out the syllables mockingly. "Aggressive growth strategies. Phase 1, land acquisition." He started to laugh, a low, cruel chuckle. "Ariana, what is this? Is this for one of your little online games?" Lucinda glided over, plucking the papers from his hand. She scanned the first page, her lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, this is precious," she cooed. "She's made a whole business plan. Look, she's even included financial projections." She turned to her fiancé. "Isn't that sweet? She thinks she's a real businesswoman." The heat flooded my face. I stood there, frozen, as they passed my plans back and forth, reading excerpts aloud and dissolving into fits of laughter. They weren't just mocking me, they were desecrating something I had poured my heart and soul into. They were taking my victory, my hard-won $22,000 of success, and turning it into another joke, another story of the pathetic, delusional wife. "Seriously, darling," Brexon said, draping an arm around my shoulder, his touch feeling like a brand. "Leave the business to us. It's stressful. You wouldn't like it. Why don't you go plan a vacation for us? Pick somewhere sunny. That's what you're good at." I pulled away from him, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the check, about the plumbing company, about the cleared lot and the untangled lien. I wanted to wipe the smug, condescending looks off their faces with the hard, cold truth of my success. But I remembered Elias's words, "Never show your hand until you're holding all the cards." So I said nothing. I swallowed the rage and the humiliation, letting it settle into a cold, hard stone in my stomach. I gave them a tight, brittle smile. "You're right," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "It's just a silly idea." I took the papers from Lucinda's hand and walked out of the room. The wound was deeper this time. This wasn't just mockery of a perceived failure. This was mockery of a real, tangible success they were too arrogant to even conceive of. They hadn't just laughed at my dream, they had laughed at my reality. And as I walked away, their laughter echoing behind me, my quiet promise to myself hardened from a vow into a certainty. I wouldn't just prove them wrong, I would ruin them. A few months later, The Caraway clan gathered for another of its sacred rituals, the reading of a will. Brexton's great-uncle, a man who had been a titan of industry in his day, had passed away, and his estate was to be divided. The event took place in a stuffy lawyer's office downtown, all dark wood paneling and the smell of old paper. I was there, of course, as Brexton's wife, a silent ornament in a room full of vultures. The lawyer, a man with a professionally somber expression, droned on, listing assets, stocks, and properties. Brexton received a controlling interest in a logistics company. Lucinda was gifted a portfolio of blue-chip stocks worth a small fortune. Even Camber, Brexton's quiet and kind-hearted cousin, received a beachfront property in the Caribbean. When the lawyer came to the final section, a collection of miscellaneous real estate holdings, my name was, unsurprisingly, not mentioned. I hadn't expected it to be, but the way it was handled was another deliberate cut. And the remaining land parcels, as detailed in Appendix C, are to be divided equally among the blood relatives of the Caraway line, the lawyer read. Lucinda shot me a triumphant, venomous look from across the polished table. She leaned toward me and whispered, her voice a low hiss, "In case it wasn't clear, that doesn't include you. You're not blood." I didn't flinch, I just stared straight ahead, my face a mask of placid neutrality. But inside, the familiar sting of being an outsider flared hot. Brexton, sensing my stillness, placed a patronizing hand on my knee under the table. "Don't worry about all this boring business stuff, honey," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "You don't need the stress, leave the business to the professionals." It was the same line he always used, a verbal pat on the head to remind me of my place. The professionals, however, were too busy mentally counting their new millions to pay much attention to the dregs of the estate. The lawyer briefly described the lots in Appendix C. They were considered junk land, a handful of leftover properties from old business deals, most of them small, oddly shaped, or in undesirable locations. Brexton and his father scoffed when a particular plot was mentioned, a 2-acre parcel on the industrial outskirts of town, listed as abandoned. "That piece of trash?" Brexton's father said with a wave of his hand. "It's landlocked, completely worthless. We tried to get an easement from the neighboring factory years ago, and they told us to go to hell. Just sell it for back taxes if you can even find a buyer." Lucinda laughed. "Maybe Ariana can use it for her Etsy business, a headquarters for her calligraphy empire." I felt a familiar flash of anger, but this time, something else mixed with it, curiosity. My mind, now trained to see opportunity where others saw trash, latched onto the details. Landlocked, industrial outskirts. I subtly pulled out my phone under the table, my fingers flying across the screen. I navigated to the city's public GIS mapping system, a tool that was now as familiar to me as my own reflection. I typed in the parcel number the lawyer had mentioned. The map loaded, showing the plot exactly as they'd described. A sad green rectangle completely surrounded by other properties, with no access to a public road. Worthless. But my eyes weren't on the plot itself, they were on the property surrounding it. The large factory to the north, the one they'd mentioned, was a dead end, but to the south was a long, narrow strip of land owned by the city's transit authority. It was undeveloped, designated as a future utility corridor. And my research from the past few months, the deep dive I'd done into the city's 5-year infrastructure plan, told me something the Caraways, in their high-level arrogance, had missed. The city wasn't just planning a utility corridor, they were in the final approval stages of building a new light rail line. And that undeveloped strip was slated to become the site of the new Southport station. The construction was set to begin in 18 months. Once that station was built, the worthless landlocked parcel next to it would suddenly have direct pedestrian access to public transportation and would be sitting at the gateway to a newly revitalized area. But there was more. I zoomed in, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. I cross-referenced the parcel number with the city zoning database. I pulled up the official documents, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. And then I saw it, a single line, a clerical error from a rezoning hearing in 1988. The property had been accidentally zoned for transit-oriented commercial development. It was a designation that didn't even make sense for a landlocked property, a clear mistake that everyone had overlooked for over 30 years. But it meant that whoever owned that land had the pre-approved rights to build up to 5 stories of mixed-use retail and office space, a gold mine in a transit-adjacent location. The Caraways, with all their high-powered lawyers and decades of experience, had missed it. They saw a worthless plot of land. I saw a jackpot. I looked up from my phone, my expression unchanged. Brexon was chuckling with his father about what they'd do with their new assets. Lucinda was preening, examining her nails. They had discarded a winning lottery ticket because they couldn't be bothered to scratch it. The devastation I should have felt at being so explicitly excluded from the family's wealth was gone, replaced by a cold, thrilling certainty. They had handed me a weapon. They had laughed at me for being a nobody, for not being a professional, while they themselves had failed the most basic test of all. They hadn't done their homework. I let a small, secret smile touch my lips. They could have their inheritance. They could have their stocks, and their companies, and their beachfront homes. I was about to take their trash and turn it into my treasure. The key to acquiring the abandoned Caraway plot was absolute secrecy. If the name Oriana Faye, or God forbid, Oriana Caraway, appeared anywhere near the transaction, the family would immediately know something was up. Their egos wouldn't be able to comprehend why I'd want their trash land, and they'd kill the deal out of sheer spite. I needed a ghost. This was where Elias's mentorship became invaluable. He wasn't just a teacher, he was a master strategist with a network of contacts built over 40 years. When you're swimming with sharks, you don't wear a steak necklace, he'd grumbled over coffee. You need a shell company, and you need a third-party buyer. Someone with no connection to you, no connection to me. He made a call. 3 days later, I was meeting with a retired accountant named Arthur Pym, a man so beige and forgettable, he was practically invisible. Arthur specialized in acting as a blind trustee for discrete real estate transactions. For a modest fee, my company, Axova Group, would fund his, and he would be the name on all the official paperwork. To the rest of the world, Arthur Pym, a boring retiree from a neighboring county, was buying a worthless piece of land. The process was nerve-wracking. The Caraway Estate's lawyers, eager to offload the trash property, listed it for sale at a price that was barely more than the accumulated back taxes. It was a fire sale price, but it was still every penny Axova Group had, including my hard-won $22,000 and the profits from 2 other small flips I had managed in the intervening months. I was pushing all my chips into the center of the table on a single bet. Every email, every phone call was a spike of anxiety. I watched the transaction progress through a secure online portal Arthur had set up, my heart pounding with every new document that was uploaded. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed next to Brexon, feigning sleep, while my mind raced through everything that could go wrong. What if someone at the Caraway Company decided to take one last look at the zoning? What if a junior analyst got curious? But their arrogance was my greatest ally. They were so convinced of the property's worthlessness that they didn't bother with a second glance. To them, this was just clearing a trivial item off the books. The day the deal closed, I received a simple, one-line email from Arthur. Transaction complete. The property is yours. I was in the basement, my secret command center. I read the email and felt a wave of relief so powerful my knees went weak. I leaned back in my dusty chair and just breathed. I owned it. A piece of land that had been in the Caraway family for generations, a piece they had discarded and mocked, was now mine. But there was no time to celebrate. The clock was ticking. The value of the land was entirely dependent on my secret knowledge of the future light rail station. I had to get it ready to sell at the exact right moment after the city officially announced the project, but before the market had time to fully react. Elias was a drill sergeant. Pride is the enemy of profit, Oriana. You own the land, good. Now make it worth something. My first step was to solve the landlocked problem. I couldn't approach the factory to the north as the Caraways had failed to do. But I didn't need to. I spent the next month buried in municipal archives, researching the city's transit authority. I discovered a little-known program that allowed owners of adjacent properties to petition for a utility and access easement on transit-owned land if it served a clear public benefit, such as enabling transit-oriented development. It was a mountain of paperwork. I crafted a 50-page proposal, complete with architectural renderings I commissioned from a young, hungry draftsman who worked for cheap. My proposal argued that granting my client, Arthur Pym, an easement would allow for the development of a commercial center that would serve the new station's commuters, increasing ridership and bringing economic activity to the area. I used my useless English degree to write a proposal so persuasive and well-reasoned that it was practically airtight. I submitted it anonymously through Arthur. Then I waited. For weeks there was silence. The anxiety returned, a constant, low-level hum. I'd sit at Caraway family dinners, listening to Brexon and Lucinda brag about their latest acquisitions, or complain about their trivial problems, all while my entire future hung in the balance of a city council subcommittee vote. The approval came on a Thursday afternoon, a terse email from Arthur with an attached PDF from the Transit Authority. The easement was granted. Just like that, my land wasn't landlocked anymore. It now had legal, direct access to the future site of the Southport station. The value of the property skyrocketed overnight, but only 2 people in the world knew it, me and Elias. The final step was to find a buyer, not just any buyer, but a big one, a national developer who would pay a premium for a shovel-ready plot with pre-approved zoning and a transit easement already in place. Elias made some discreet inquiries through his network. Within a week, we had a bite. A major REIT, real estate investment trust, based out of Chicago, was looking to expand into our city. They were aggressive, and they paid cash. 90 days after I had secretly purchased the Caraway's junk land, I sold it. I never even spoke to the buyer. Arthur handled the entire transaction. The day the wire transfer came through, I was in my car, parked a block away from the Caraway estate. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Axova Group business bank account. I opened the app, my hand shaking. My initial investment, everything I had, was about $80,000. The number that now stared back at me from the screen was staggering. After paying Arthur's fee and Elias's 10%, my company's bank account held a balance of just over $700,000. I had nearly decoupled my investment in 3 months. I leaned my head back against the seat and laughed. It wasn't a happy, giggling laugh. It was a wild, unhinged, cathartic sound of pure, unadulterated victory. I had done it. I had taken their trash, their mockery, and their condescension, and I had spun it into a fortune, right under their noses. I reinvested everything. I didn't take a penny for myself. With Elias's guidance, I quietly began building a team under the Axova Group shell. A paralegal, a contract accountant, a young zoning analyst. My name was nowhere. Axova Group was a ghost, a phantom company with a rapidly growing portfolio and no public face, and the Caraways were none the wiser. Brexon's 30th birthday was, predictably, an extravagant affair. He rented out the top floor of a chic downtown hotel, a space with panoramic city views, and a price tag that could fund a small startup for a year. The theme was vintage Casino Royale, and the Caraway set arrived dripping in designer tuxedos and sequined gowns, all too eager to play the part of high-rolling spies. I stood by his side, wearing a simple but elegant black dress, playing my part, the beautiful, silent wife. But inside, I was vibrating with a secret energy. Just 2 days prior, Axova Group had closed its biggest deal yet. We had acquired a portfolio of 3 mid-sized apartment buildings in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. It was a complex, off-market deal that I had orchestrated myself, negotiating with 3 different sellers simultaneously. The deal had netted Axova a 6-figure profit on paper the moment it closed, and it positioned us as a serious player in the city's multifamily market. My company's net worth had quietly crested the $1 million mark. As Brexon held court, accepting backslapping congratulations and expensive gifts, I felt a powerful, almost irresistible urge. The temptation to flex, just a little, was a physical itch. His friends were gathered around, talking about their latest stock market wins and the new sports cars they'd bought. Made a killing on that biotech IPO, one of them bragged. A solid 25K in a week. Not bad, another chimed in, swirling his scotch. I just pre-ordered the new Porsche, had to pull a few strings to get to the front of the list. They were so proud of their wins, which were, in the grand scheme of things, pocket change to their families. My win was bigger, it was realer, it was all mine. The words formed on my tongue. That's nice. My company just acquired $12 million in real estate assets. The sentence was right there. A loaded gun aimed at the heart of their smug little world. I could see their faces, the confused, disbelieving stares. I could imagine Brexon's forced laugh as he tried to play it off as a joke. I opened my mouth to speak. Just then, my phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from Elias. It was almost as if he could sense my thoughts from across the city. The message was short and stark. A lion doesn't roar to prove it's a lion. Let the kill speak for itself. Not yet. I snapped my mouth shut. He was right. A subtle mention, a clever hint, it would be satisfying for a moment, but it would be a strategic blunder. It would put them on alert. It would give them time to prepare, to close ranks, to use their considerable power to find out what I was doing and try to stop me. A premature reveal would be a fleeting taste of victory, but it would rob me of the main course. What I was planning wasn't a dinner party anecdote, it was a corporate decapitation. Oriana seems quiet tonight, Lucinda observed, gliding over to us. She looked me up and down, a faint sneer on her lips. Tired from all your basement activities. Brexon chuckled. Give her a break, Luce. She spent all week picking out my birthday gift. It's a very stressful process. He gestured to the new, absurdly expensive watch on his wrist. A watch I had paid for with the Caraway household account, an account I still had access to, an account I thought of as a small, ongoing reimbursement for emotional damages. I smiled my serene, practiced smile. He has very particular taste, I said, my voice smooth as silk. It took a lot of research. The urge was still there, a burning coal in my chest. I wanted to tell them that the research I had been doing involved analyzing pro forma income statements and negotiating with hardened property lawyers. I wanted to tell them that while they were playing with their inheritances, I was building an empire from their scraps. But I held my tongue. Elias was right. The reveal had to be devastating. It had to be a public spectacle. It had to be a moment from which they could never recover. It needed to be so perfectly timed, so overwhelmingly powerful, that it wouldn't just burn through their pride, it would burn through their reputations, their finances, their very sense of self. It would burn through their skin. So I let them have their moment. I watched them laugh and boast, completely oblivious to the predator that was living in their house, smiling in their faces, and patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I raised my glass of champagne when they toasted Brexon's health and prosperity, and as I took a sip, I made a silent toast of my own, to the kill. My successes, however secret, did not go entirely unnoticed. While the name Ariana Faye was a ghost, the name Axova Group was starting to make ripples in the city's real estate circles. We were moving too fast, too smart. We were winning bids for properties that established players had their eyes on. We were a mystery, and in a world built on reputation and connections, mysteries make people nervous, and no one was more connected than the Caraways. The trouble started with Lucinda. Her fiancé, a man named Sterling, was a partner at a rival development firm. During one of their pillow talk sessions, he must have complained about a shadowy new company that had outmaneuvered them on a deal for a prime commercial building. He mentioned the name Axova Group. The name meant nothing to Lucinda, but my name did. A few days later, she was at a charity luncheon and overheard a conversation between two city planners. They were discussing a series of permit applications filed by Axova Group, praising the thoroughness and intelligence of the proposals. One of them mentioned that the contact person for the filings, a low-level paralegal I had hired, had the same last name as a junior staffer who used to work for my father's small accounting firm years ago. It was a tenuous link, a one-in-a-million coincidence, But for a suspicious, venomous mind like Lucinda's, it was enough. She started digging. She didn't have my work ethic or my intelligence, but she had something I didn't: her father's immense power. She went to him with her suspicions. "It's Oriana," she must have insisted. "It has to be. No one else is this clever and this invisible. She's been playing us this whole time." Her father, a man who couldn't stand the thought of being outsmarted, especially by me, unleashed his resources. He didn't need proof. The mere possibility was enough of a threat. He couldn't attack Axova directly. We were legally sound and had done nothing wrong. So he did what powerful men do. He started a smear campaign. Whispers began to circulate. Rumors that Axova Group was a front for foreign money of dubious origin. Innuendos that we were using unethical tactics to pressure sellers. His cronies in the media planted blind items in business columns about a reckless new player poised for a spectacular collapse. The effect was immediate and devastating. I was in the final stages of securing a major line of credit from a regional bank, the capital I needed to move from buying buildings to developing my own projects. The day a particularly nasty column was published, my loan officer called. "Oriana," he said, his voice strained. "I'm sorry. The board is getting cold feet. These rumors, we have to put a hold on the application until this blows over." Then, the investors I had been courting, the ones I needed to partner with on larger projects, started pulling out. One by one, their assistants would call with vague excuses. A shift in strategy, unforeseen market volatility. It was a coordinated attack, an invisible wall going up around me, engineered by the caraway machine. I was hemorrhaging credibility. My carefully built enterprise was starting to crumble, not because of a bad deal or a market downturn, but because of whispers and lies. I broke down. I was in my basement office late one night, staring at a list of withdrawn offers and canceled meetings. The pressure was immense. I felt like I was fighting a ghost, an enemy I couldn't see but whose punches were landing with brutal force. I put my head in my hands and, for the first time since that day I'd lost my savings, I cried. Elias found me like that. He'd let himself in with the spare key I'd given him. He didn't say anything. He just put a cup of coffee on the desk and sat in the chair opposite me, waiting for the storm to pass. "They're going to win," I said finally. My voice choked. "I can't fight this. They have too much power." "Power is a tool," he said, his voice calm and steady. "They're using a sledgehammer. It's loud and destructive, but it's not precise. We're not going to fight them with another sledgehammer. We're going to use a scalpel." He pointed to the wall where I had pinned up a massive zoning map of the city. "Forget the investors for now. Forget the loans. They're attacking your reputation because they can't attack your work. So let's make the work unassailable. Let's find a deal so good, so smart, that no rumor can touch it." His words focused me. He was right. I wiped my tears and stood up, turning to the map. We spent the rest of the night scanning it, looking for an opening, a loophole, a weakness in the system that only we could see. And then I found it. It was buried deep within the fine print of the contract for a massive city-led redevelopment project, the Southport Innovation District. It was the biggest project in the city, a multi-billion-dollar plan to turn a derelict industrial waterfront into a hub for tech and biotech companies. Every major developer, including Caraway Consolidated, was fighting for a piece of it. The city was selling the development rights, but the contract was a monster, hundreds of pages of legalese and technical specifications. As I read through it for the 10th time, a single clause jumped out at me. It was a holdover from an old maritime law designed to give the city flexibility. It stated that any developer who could guarantee a certain percentage of public waterfront access in perpetuity would be given preferential bidding status and, more importantly, would be allowed to bypass certain stages of the public review process. It was a loophole designed to fast-track development, but it was so obscure and difficult to execute that no one ever used it. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that the small, independent port authority that controlled a key strip of the waterfront was on the verge of bankruptcy. I knew this because my contract accountant used to handle their books. I knew they were desperate. Elias, I said, my voice electric with excitement. I think I found our scalpel. We could buy the Port Authority's debt for pennies on the dollar, take control of that strip of waterfront, and gift the access rights to the city in a legally binding trust. It was a bold, complex, and incredibly risky move. But if it worked, it would give our bid for the Southport project an advantage that no amount of caraway rumors could overcome. We wouldn't just win control, we would seize it. The despair I had felt just hours before was gone, burned away by the heat of a new, audacious plan. Lucinda and her father had tried to sabotage me with whispers. I was about to answer them with an earthquake. The Southport Innovation District was the moonshot. It wasn't just another deal. It was the deal. An $82 million government contract to be the master developer for a project that would redefine the city's skyline and its economic future. Every major player was in on the bidding, including, most notably, Caraway Consolidated. For them, it was a legacy project, the jewel in their corporate crown. For me, it was everything. Putting in a bid was, by any rational measure, suicide. Axova Group was still a ghost. We had capital, yes, but we didn't have the reputation, the manpower, or the public profile of our competitors. The Caraways were submitting a bid, backed by a century of influence and billions in assets. I was submitting one from a basement. When I told Elias my plan, not just to bid, but to bid for the entire master developer contract, he was silent for a full minute. He stared at the proposal outline I had drafted, his brow furrowed. I held my breath, waiting for him to tell me I was insane. Instead, a slow smile spread across his face. "It's a beautiful, crazy, brilliant idea," he said. "They'll never see it coming. They're all fighting a land war, and you're planning an aerial assault." But it was a gamble that would take everything we had. The bid bond alone, a deposit required just to submit a proposal, was $500,000, and my plan to acquire the Port Authority's debt to secure the waterfront access required even more liquid capital. We were short. "I'm in," Elias said, without a moment's hesitation. He went to his own bank and put up $1 million of his personal retirement savings, a life's worth of careful investing, and wired it to Axova Group's account. He pushed the transfer confirmation slip across the table to me. "We win this, or we burn trying," he said, his eyes deadly serious. "There's no in-between." The weight of his trust was immense, a heavier burden than any amount of caraway scorn. I couldn't fail. Not just for me, but for him. The next 6 weeks were a descent into a special kind of hell. I didn't just work. I ceased to exist outside the confines of the Southport project. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, something I snatched in 2-hour increments on a cot I set up in the basement. I lived on coffee and protein bars. My world shrank to the glow of my multiple monitor setup, a universe of financial models, environmental impact reports, architectural renderings, and legal statutes. I was living a double life of the most extreme nature. Upstairs, I was still Oriana Caraway. I'd emerge from my basement cavern, shower, put on a nice dress, and go play the part of the perfect wife at some vapid dinner party. I'd listen to Lucinda complain about her wedding florist, while my mind was wrestling with structural engineering calculations. I'd smile at Brexon as he talked about his golf game, while I was mentally rehearsing the lines of my pitch to the city council. The disconnect was so profound it felt like a waking dream. Brexon noticed my exhaustion, my gaunt features, but he interpreted it through his own narcissistic lens. "You look tired, honey," he said one morning, looking at me with a flicker of what might have been concern if it weren't so steeped in condescension. "Maybe you should cut back on your online shopping. It seems to be taking a lot out of you." I just nodded, too tired to even feel the sting. The menimis and the wandard hastily. "Unlooking the father's comma ingers says, of log full to my tarmet, a monologue." My team, the small, loyal group I had assembled, was incredible. They caught my fire and matched my pace. We worked 14-hour days, 7 days a week, from a small, anonymous office space I rented month to month. We were a tiny band of insurgents plotting to take over a kingdom. The pitch had to be perfect. It couldn't just be good, it had to be undeniable. Our financial offer was aggressive, But the centerpiece was the waterfront loophole. We created a breathtaking presentation, complete with a virtual reality walkthrough of the public parks and promenades we were gifting to the city. We emphasized community benefits, job creation for local unions, and a commitment to sustainable design that made the Caraway proposal look like a relic from the past. The day before the bids were due, I stood in our small conference room, looking at the final proposal. It was thousands of pages long, a monument to obsession. It was the best work I had ever done. It was the best work I could possibly do. We submitted it electronically at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before the deadline. As I drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, I felt an eerie calm. I had done it. I had pushed all the chips in. I had taken my shot. There was nothing left to do but wait for the outcome. Win or burn. I walked into the Caraway mansion just as the sun was rising. The house was quiet. I went to my room, stripped off my clothes, and fell into bed. For the first time in months, my mind was quiet. There were no more numbers to crunch, no more clauses to analyze. I had launched my missile. Now I just had to wait to see if it hit the target. It's Christmas again, the 1-year anniversary of the promise I made to myself in the cold, dusty basement. I'm standing in the grand foyer of the Caraway estate, and the scene is so familiar, it feels like a recurring dream. The same suffocating scent of pine, the same glittering chandeliers, the same chorus of hollow laughter. On the surface, nothing has changed. To the Caraway clan, I am still the same person I was a year ago. Oriana, the quiet, ornamental wife, the nobody. But everything has changed. Inside, I am a stranger. The woman who sobbed in the basement is gone, replaced by a CEO who just orchestrated an $82 million gambit. The fear that once churned in my stomach has been replaced by a cold, patient calm. It's the calm of a sniper who has found her target, taken her shot, and is simply waiting for the bullet to land. The city council had made their decision 2 days ago in a closed-door session. The official announcement was scheduled to be made tonight, live, during the evening business report. I don't know the result. Elias and I agreed that finding out with the rest of the world was part of the strategy. There could be no leaks, no tells. My ignorance is my armor. Brexon finds me by the enormous, ostentatiously decorated Christmas tree. He's holding 2 glasses of champagne. He hands one to me, his smile as handsome and as empty as ever. "There you are," he says. "I was wondering where you'd wandered off to. You seem distracted tonight." "Just a lot on my mind," I reply, my voice even. "Don't tell me you're still busy," he says with a light chuckle, the sound grating on my nerves. "What is it this time? Are you learning to knit? I saw a ball of yarn in your car the other day." It was a skein of cheap yarn I'd bought to test the tensile strength of a new composite material for a model. The lie is so much more pathetic than the truth. It's perfect. Before I can respond, Lucinda sweeps in, a vision in emerald green silk. She kisses Brexon on both cheeks, completely ignoring me. "Breck, darling, Daddy is about to make a toast. He's practically giddy. He said the Southport deal is all but signed. A lovely Christmas bonus for the family." She finally deigns to look at me, her eyes sweeping over my simple black dress with disdain. "Oh, Oriana, you're here. I almost didn't see you. Still knitting scarves, are we? Perhaps you can make me one for my honeymoon." The old me would have shrunk under her gaze. The old me would have felt a hot flush of shame. But the new me just smiles. A small, enigmatic smile that doesn't quite reach my eyes. I say nothing. My silence seems to unnerve her more than any retort could. She narrows her eyes, searching my face for the familiar flicker of hurt, but it isn't there. I am a black box, a void. They can't get a purchase on me anymore, and it confuses them. We drift into the dining room, the same long mahogany table, the same suffocating opulence. I take my seat beside Brexon. Across the table, I see Camber, Brexon's cousin. He gives me a small, kind smile, the only person in the room who ever shows me genuine warmth. He's a good man in a family of predators, but his kindness is passive, silenced by his fear of rocking the boat. Beside Lucinda is her date for the evening, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes who is observing everything with a journalist's detached curiosity. It's Rhea Dolmer. Lucinda probably invited her to show off, to ensure the Caraway's expected Southport victory would be documented for a fawning society piece. The irony is delicious. The dinner conversation is insufferable, a cacophony of self-congratulation. Brexton's father stands to make a toast, his voice booming with premature triumph. To family, he says, raising his glass, and to the future. A future where the Caraway name will be synonymous with the city's greatest achievement, the Southport Innovation District. A round of applause and smug hear-hears echo around the table. They're all looking at me, expecting me to clap along, to celebrate their victory. I just raise my glass an inch off the table and take a small sip, my expression unreadable. My silence is a vacuum, and it's making them uncomfortable. "What's the matter, Ariana?" Brexton's father asks, his tone edged with impatience. "Not excited for our family's success?" "I'm just waiting for the official confirmation," I say calmly. "I don't like to celebrate prematurely." Lucinda scoffs. "Oh please, it's a done deal. Daddy's sources are impeccable. Unlike your hobbies, this is how the real world works, Oriana. It's about who you know." And just like last year, as if on cue, the waiter rolls in the gold-plated television screen. My heart begins a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. This is it. Win or burn. "Time for the evening business report," Brexton announces, a wide, predatory grin on his face. "Let's watch the official coronation." The screen flickers to life. The familiar news anchor appears. The tension in the room is thick, but it's a tension of excitement, of anticipation for a victory already won. My tension is different. It's the stillness of the universe in the single moment before it either explodes or implodes. I fold my hands in my lap, my posture serene. I am ready. The news anchor's face is serious as she shuffles her papers. The breaking news banner flashes across the bottom of the screen. I see the words Southport Innovation District, and my breath catches in my throat. The camera cuts from the news desk to a live press conference at City Hall. The mayor is at the podium, flanked by the entire city council, and there, standing just behind him, is Elias Vane, looking grim and distinguished in his best suit. He catches the camera's eye for a split second and gives a nearly imperceptible nod. "We won." My heart gives a single, powerful thud of triumph, but I keep my face a perfect placid mask. The show isn't over yet. The best part is just beginning. In a decision that is sending shockwaves through the city's business community, the anchor's voice narrates, "The contract for the Southport Innovation District has been awarded." Brexton's father leans forward, a broad, satisfied smile on his face. Lucinda is practically vibrating with excitement. The winning bid, the anchor continues, in a stunning and audacious upset, was not from one of the city's established giants. The smile on the Caraway patriarch's face falters. Brexton's hand, holding his champagne flute, freezes halfway to his lips. The screen cuts to a different shot. It's pre-recorded footage from earlier in the day. A formal contract signing in the governor's office. The camera pans across the table. Governor Elridge is there, beaming, and sitting next to him, pen in hand, is a woman in a sharp navy blazer, her hair in a power bun, her expression confident and serene. "It's me." The camera zooms in on my face as I sign the document, my signature a bold, decisive stroke. The news anchor's voice is crisp and clear, a hammer blow in the silent room. The $82 million project has been awarded to Exova Group, a relatively new but formidable firm whose pitch was called a masterclass in civic-minded development by the mayor's office. And the founder and CEO of Exova Group is a name that, until today, has been unknown in the real estate world. A photo of me, a professional headshot I had taken weeks ago, fills the screen. Beneath it, the chyron is a declaration of war. Oriana Faye, founder and CEO, Exova Group. The sound in the room is a symphony of shock, a sharp, strangled gasp from Lucinda. A clatter of metal as Brexton's fork drops from his suddenly nerveless hand and hits his plate. A low, guttural noise of disbelief from his father, who has gone a ghastly corpse-like white. His face, moments before so ruddy with victory, now looks like a death mask. I watch their reactions, savoring each one. This is the moment I have played in my mind 1,000 times. It is more satisfying than I ever could have imagined. From the end of the table, I see a flash. Rhea Dolmer, the journalist, isn't just watching, she's filming. Her professional camera, which she'd been using to capture lifestyle footage, is now aimed directly at the Caraway family, her lens zooming in on their shattered, incredulous faces. She knows, this is the real story. In the stunned silence, one voice cuts through. It's Camber. Sweet, naive Camber. He's staring at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "Oriana?" he blurts out, his voice cracking. You bought the Innovation District?" I finally allow myself to move. I turn my head slowly to look at him, and then, I let the smile I have been holding back for a year finally bloom on my face. It's not a happy smile, it is the smile of a queen who has just checkmated the entire board. "No, Camber," I say, my voice calm, clear, and carrying to every corner of the silent, frozen room. I bought the land under it too. The fallout was not a slow burn, it was an explosion. My final words hung in the air of the dining room, a second, more powerful detonation that shattered the last of their composure. The land under the district, they all knew what that meant. The Caraway bid, like all the others, had been for the development rights. They had planned to spend years and millions negotiating with the dozens of small property owners in the area. By revealing I already owned the land, I wasn't just announcing a victory, I was announcing their total and absolute annihilation. I hadn't just won the race, I had bought the racetrack, the stadium, and the parking lot while they were still tying their shoes. Lucinda was the first to break. Her face, a mask of disbelief moments before, crumpled into a rictus of pure fury. "You liar," she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. "You conniving little snake, how could you?" But her fiancé, Sterling, wasn't looking at me. He was staring at Lucinda, his face pale, a look of dawning horror in his eyes. His firm was a major stakeholder in several of the key parcels within the Southport footprint. Parcels that I, through Axova Group, now owned. Their entire strategy, and a significant portion of his firm's projected revenue for the next decade, had just evaporated. "The wedding," he stammered, looking from Lucinda to me and back again. "The financing for our new development. It was contingent on the Southport land." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't even look at Lucinda as he spoke his next words, his voice flat and dead. "The deal is off." He turned and walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving Lucinda standing there, her mouth agape, her world collapsing in real time. Then, all eyes turned to Brexon. He was still frozen, his face a kaleidoscope of confusion, rage, and a dawning, terrifying understanding. He looked at me as if for the first time, not as his meek, decorative wife, but as a complete and dangerous stranger. "My credit card," he mumbled, pulling his phone from his pocket, his fingers fumbling with the screen. He tapped frantically at his banking app. "It was declined this afternoon. At the gas station. I thought it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I took a sip of my water. "The card was a joint account, with me as the primary cosigner. I had my name removed from the account last week. Apparently your credit score, on its own, wasn't sufficient for the bank to maintain your limit." His head snapped up, his eyes blazing with a helpless fury. The Caraway name, the name he thought was a shield and a sword, was suddenly just a name. The real power, the financial backing he had always taken for granted, had been in part me. The silent partner he never even knew he had. Brexon's father finally found his voice. It was a low, dangerous growl. "You will not get away with this," he seethed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I will ruin you. I will bury that little company of yours." "You already tried," I replied calmly. "The smear campaign was very impressive, but it's hard to ruin a company that just secured an $82 million government contract and owns the most valuable piece of real estate in the city. The markets, as you love to say, have a short memory for rumors, but a very long one for profits. The story broke the next morning. Rhea Dolmer's article wasn't a society piece, it was a bombshell. It ran on the front page of the nation's biggest financial newspaper, complete with the pictures she'd taken of the family's shocked faces. The headline was devastatingly simple: "The woman they mocked, the empire she built." The article was a sensation. It told the whole story: the anonymous LLC, the clever land acquisitions, the sabotage attempt by the Caraway patriarch, and the final brilliant checkmate with the Southport bid. It painted them as arrogant, oblivious fools, and me as a quiet, calculating genius. The narrative was irresistible. The Caraway consolidated stock plummeted on the opening bell. Investors, spooked by the public display of incompetence and internal strife, started to flee. The empire my husband's family had built on reputation and fear began to crumble under the weight of a single, perfectly told story. I didn't stick around to watch the rest. The morning the article was published, while they were all huddled with their lawyers and PR teams, I had a moving truck pull up to the Caraway estate. I didn't take much, just my clothes, my books, and the old dusty laptop from the basement. I left the jewelry, the designer bags, the entire gilded cage behind. As I walked out the front door for the last time, I passed Brexon in the hallway. He looked hollowed out, aged a decade overnight. "Ariana," he pleaded, his voice raspy, "we can fix this, don't go." I stopped and looked at him. At the man I had once thought I loved. At the man who had been my tormentor and my motivation. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, not even satisfaction, just a vast, empty space, where my feelings for him used to be. "There is no we, Brexon," I said softly. "There never was." And then I walked away, leaving him alone in the silent, cavernous mansion he had inherited, a king in a kingdom of ghosts. My new beginning was waiting. I didn't buy a penthouse or a sprawling mansion. I bought a quiet, unassuming house on a tree-lined street, far from the ostentatious neighborhoods the Caraways favored. It was a beautiful home, filled with light, but its best feature was in the back, a large glass greenhouse. It was a place for things to grow. I spent my first few weekends there, not negotiating deals or analyzing spreadsheets, but with my hands in the dirt, planting orchids and ferns. I was cultivating life, quietly and patiently. It was the perfect antidote to the years I'd spent in the sterile, airless world of the Caraway estate. Axova Group flourished. Freed from the shadows, we became one of the most respected development firms in the region. Our work on the Southport Innovation District became the new gold standard for public-private partnerships. Offers poured in, to expand nationally, to go public, to merge with larger corporations. I turned them all down. I had no desire to build the biggest empire. I just wanted to build the best one. I kept my team small, my projects selective, and my name, for the most part, out of the headlines. The story of my victory was enough. I didn't need to become a celebrity. The work was the reward. One sunny afternoon, I drove out to the country to visit Elias. He had officially retired for good the day after the Southport announcement, handing the reins of his 10% stake in Axova over to a professionally managed trust, with the profits directed to a charitable foundation he'd started in his daughter's name. I found him on his back porch, reading a book and sipping iced tea, looking more at peace than I had ever seen him. He looked up as I approached, a warm, proud smile on his face. "Madam CEO," he said with a respectful nod, "to what do I owe the honor?" "I brought you something," I said, handing him a small, gift-wrapped box. He opened it. Inside was a simple, framed photo. It was a picture of the two of us, taken on the day the Southport project broke ground. We were both wearing hard hats, covered in a light dusting of dirt, and laughing. He stared at the photo for a long time, his eyes misty. "You did it, kid," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You really did it. You reminded an old man that it's never too late to fix a mistake." "You didn't fix a mistake, Elias," I told him. "You built a future, for me, and for your daughter's legacy." We sat there for hours, talking not about business, but about books, and gardening, and life. It was a quiet, comfortable companionship, the kind forged in fire and settled in peace. As I left, he walked me to my car. "You know," he said, "the Caraways are a mess. The father was forced into retirement by the board. Brexon is selling off assets to cover his debts. And Lucinda, I heard she's taking business classes at the community college." I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't triumph. It was just closure. They were no longer the giants who haunted my dreams. They were just people, flawed and broken, architects of their own demise. Their story was over. Mine was just beginning. A few weeks later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my office. The return address was a law firm I recognized as belonging to the Caraway family's new, less prestigious legal counsel. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cardstock, embossed with Lucinda's initials. The note was brief and written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. "Oriana," it read, "I am starting a new venture and would be grateful for the opportunity to discuss a potential partnership. I believe your expertise could be of great value. Please let me know when you might be available to meet." I read it twice, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. A partnership. Business help. After everything, after the years of mockery and humiliation, after trying to destroy me, she was coming to me for help. The audacity was breathtaking. The old me, the one who craved their approval, might have seen this as the ultimate victory. The chance to finally rub her nose in it, to sit across from her and dictate the terms of her surrender. But I wasn't that person anymore. Her request wasn't an opportunity. It was an anchor, a final, desperate attempt to pull me back into the toxic orbit of her world. My victory wasn't about lording my success over them. It was about leaving them behind. It was about my freedom. That evening, I was at home, sitting in front of the fireplace in my quiet living room. A small, crackling fire burned brightly, casting a warm glow on the room. I took Lucinda's invitation from my pocket. I looked at her name, at her desperate, pleading words. And then, I tossed it into the flames. I watched as the heavy paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash, disappearing forever. It was not an act of anger or revenge. It was an act of release. I was finally, completely free. I leaned back, the warmth of the fire on my face, and smiled. The future was bright, and it was all mine. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who fear your growth the most, because it exposes what they never had the courage to chase. Have you ever been underestimated by family, or laughed at when you started something new? Let me know in the comments. I read them all. If this story gave you chills or strength, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful real-life inspired stories. This is Oriana's story, but it might just be yours too. Until next time, stay bold.